Welcome to Draw This. Draw This is a series of videos where I'll randomly generate a word and then draw it for you in real time while describing my process so that you, the viewer, can follow along. I'm here on wordgenerator.net and the random word that I get is star. So we're going to do a sun or a star depending on how you want to look at it, and this will be the familiar sun that we know that we have in our solar system. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm here in Corel Painter and I have a canvas that is 10 by 10 inches at 300 ppi, but you could use any size canvas that you want. So we'll go ahead and start painting. The first thing that we'll need to do is create a dark background. We'll use the paint bucket tool along with a black color to go ahead and tap or click within the canvas to fill it with that dark color. Now we have a nice dark space color. We'll create a new layer, and this will be called Sun. This will be the chromosphere, or the outer layer of the sun. We'll look under the rectangular selection menu, and there is the elliptical selection tool. And if you hold Shift and Alt while drawing, you can draw a perfect circle from the center. You can drag that circle to move it wherever you want, and we'll position it just right there in the center of the canvas. We'll use the paint bucket again to go ahead and fill this selection using a bright yellow color. We will click within the circle to go ahead and fill it. And then we can do the keyboard shortcut of Control D to deselect our selection. We'll use the diffuse blur blender to go ahead and blend along the edges of this to soften the edges. You want to use small tight circles while you're blending and use light pressure to just lightly fuzz or fade the edges. We want this to look like it's a very soft edge and not very sharp at all because it's the sun. It's light and gas, so we want it to look very soft. We'll turn on Preserve Transparency and we'll use the Scratchboard tool to just paint with that same color right along the edge to paint over any white fringe that was caused by the blending. Then we'll select a yellow that's lighter in hue, and we'll use the digital airbrush to go ahead and paint along the edge with this lighter yellow. Now we want this sun to look like a sphere that is the lightest at the very edge of the sun and much darker in the center. We're not really going to add value to our color, we're just going to shift the hue, and that'll give a more natural effect. So I shifted the hue darker towards orange. Now I'm going to use a very big airbrush to paint in the center and then radiate outwards. You want this nice radial gradient that's very dark in the center. We'll select a red-orange and continue painting in the center to make this look more spherical. Now we can go ahead and turn Preserve Transparency off. And the next thing that we can do is create a selection from that sun layer by right-clicking on the layer and doing Select Layer Content. We'll do Control-Shift-H to hide that selection, and we'll create a new layer for granules. We'll use the Square Chalk brush and the Polypay Wool paper texture, and we'll crank the texture settings up. We'll go ahead and paint, and we'll add a nice fractal texture here to our sun surface. And we can make the composite method multiply to help this blend in a little better. We can reduce the opacity just to get a nice blend to where it looks more appropriate. And then we can reduce the paper scale and contrast and continue adding more texture of varied size, just to give this a nice fractal kind of sun texture. We can experiment with different paper textures as well. The pebble board gives a nice granular texture, which is what we're going for. So now it's looking a little like an orange, but don't worry, we'll do a little more work to this and make it look more like the sun. We'll select a darker red-orange and paint a little more granular texture onto the sun surface. And then once we're done with that, we can go ahead and make this look a little more three-dimensional by selecting the bulge brush and painting with a large brush, mainly in the center of the sun, to bulge out the pixels in the center and make it look a little more spherical. Just all around in the center there. And then the next thing that we can do is we can select the turbulence brush and paint lightly and add a little bit of turbulence or rippling, swirling of the sun surface. We'll use the diffuse blur with light pressure to blend following the contours of the sphere very lightly in some areas. That'll just help soften all of this texture and make it look a little more organic. We'll create a new layer as the topmost layer and call it sunspots. We'll select a dark red-orange in the Square Chalk brush, and here and there in a few little spots, we'll add a few dark spots. You may have to hunt for the right color. I'm going to try a few different dark reds here until I find one that I like. I think this one is working so far. You can place these spots randomly, and you can do really as many as you want or as few as you want. So I'm just going to do a few here and there, spread out over the sun surface. Still not happy with that red color, and I want to change the composite method to multiply and reduce the opacity so that I get a blend that looks a little bit better. We'll use the diffuse blur to, again, blur those sunspots a little bit to help assimilate them into the sun surface. And then we'll make a new layer. We'll just call this yellow. This will be the yellow color that we'll put over the sun just to add some more glowing areas to the chromosphere. We'll select that polypay wool texture and go ahead and paint with the square chalk brush and add a nice layer of bright yellow texture to the sun surface. We'll adjust the paper settings so that we get something different, and then we get a smaller fractal that mixes with the bigger fractal and just helps it look more organic. Once we're done painting the yellow, we can go ahead and swirl it a little bit using that turbulence brush again, and just swirl it a little bit here and there. Don't go too crazy with this brush because you can overdo it. Same thing with diffuse blur. We'll blur a little bit, but again, try not to over blur because you'll blur away all of your texture and you'll have to start over. If you overpainted any edges, just blur those and that overpainting will go away. Again, I'm following the spherical contour. I'm going to create a layer for a corona, and we'll make a screen composite method. We'll select a dark red orange and the glow brush, and we'll go ahead and move the corona underneath the sun layer. The corona is that glowing area that surrounds or envelops the sun or the star. So we'll go ahead and paint that in, building it up, starting out with light pressure and then using firmer pressure and painting more or less with the edge of the brush. A big brush works best for this. So you just want there to be a nice little halo around your star or your sun. We'll use the diffuse blur blender to blend with strokes that radiate out from the center of the sun. This will give the effect of light rays emanating from the star. And then we'll create a new layer on the top of all the other layers, and we will call it glows. It will be a screen composite method, and we'll select a dark yellow for our glows and the glow brush. Now here's where we're going to start to make this look more like a star. In the areas that have a large concentration of yellow, those are good areas to put solar flares. So you can paint along the edge or stay towards the middle of the star, it's up to you. But just build up some nice bright areas where it's already pretty much yellow. This is going to start to make it look like light is kind of emanating through the sun. And you can go ahead and paint all along the edge with a medium-sized brush to make the edge nice and bright. Now it looks like it's glowing. You can intensify that glow in the center of the solar flares. Add a little white just by painting over it with more of that same yellow color. And now we can go ahead and make the solar flares look like they're sticking out more. We'll use the diffuse blur to blend away from the star edge to make those solar flares look like they're flaring out. And we can do that anywhere along the edges where we added a lot of yellow just to help everything look like it's light rays emanating out. We'll create a new layer called Glows 2, and we'll select a dark orange to paint with. We'll use the glow brush, and we'll go ahead and just glow all along the edge to help the edge glow even more. And it's this kind of fuzzing and blurring and glowing of this edge that makes it look like a sun. We'll add a new layer and use red orange to paint in some prominences. And you want these to look kind of like flames. They can kind of flow out of the sun. We'll select a dark yellow, and we will add a kind of magnetic effect to the emanations from our solar flares. And with the other solar flare, we can have that one going a little bit further into space by adding some thin lines that kind of eject from it. Now we have something that's looking a lot more like a sun, and it has a lot of the components of a sun. The next thing that we can do is we can paint a thin line along the edge to add a little more sharpness and glow to the edge. You don't have to go along the whole edge, just do it in a few places here and there. And you can make some light rays emanate from the rest of your solar flares in the center. We'll add a multiply layer for tint and select a dark red orange and use the square chalk with the polypay wool paper texture to paint in some more texture on top of what we already have here. And you'll want to vary your paper size, change the opacity and reduce it a little bit, and use the diffuse blur to again blur as you've been doing with all of the other layers, just to help blend them in. You'll want to reduce the opacity until you get a nice blend. Zoom out to evaluate, and if it's looking good small, then you know you're on the right track. We'll use the square chalk brush to just paint in a little bit more texture, because from afar I can see it needs a little more contrast, adding some of these dark areas. These could be sunspots or just texture. And again, you want to blend. Blending's important because you want there to be a good balance of soft and sharp contrast. Now we can go ahead and start wrapping this up. We'll save a copy of our artwork so that we can go ahead and drop all the layers. We'll use the Hurricane Distorto brush to go ahead and distort this. You want to use a lower opacity so you don't distort it too much. And just kind of twirl and swirl in a few places wherever you think you need to do that. You can do it to the solar flares and the prominences and the corona. We'll add a new layer for glows. That'll be a screen composite method. We'll select a dark yellow color, and we will select the glow brush. We'll go ahead and paint a little bit more glow here and there as we need to enhance the glow overall. And then we'll play with the opacity until we get a nice blend. You can do a before and after to see what you have now. And I think that looks pretty good. And now we can do one more save to save our finished star. So there you go, we have a finished piece. If you enjoyed this episode of Draw This, join me every Tuesday for another episode. And like this video, share it on YouTube or on Facebook, and don't forget to click the subscribe button to help grow this channel. I'll see you next Tuesday.